Hey guys, I'm Mitch Stokes,
I'm John Matulevich from Ruthless Performance.
and I'm from Fluid Fitness Solutions, and we're here to talk about anaerobic training for endurance athletes. Before we get started, let's talk about what that means. What is anaerobic training? What does that do for the body?
So I guess realistically, you could just break it down into, the different levels of what substrate the body is burning to yield any kind of
That's
activity.
fuel.
Yeah. So you could break it down into anaerobic just means that we're creating ATP use throughout any kind of oxidative means.
Yeah.
So
Now, for the layman, you burn ATP is produced by glucose, correct?
Yep.
So your blood sugar, your carbohydrates in your body, your fuel in your blood sugar gets broken down, and you create ATP, which is what adenose triphosphate, whatever.
Yep.
And then you're anaerobic. You're burning the ATP with the absence of oxygen, correct?
Yep, that's true.
And then aerobic, you use oxygen.
So unfortunately, there's a trade-off. So that anaerobic provides a quicker access to energy, but it does so in a more inefficient manner. So that's why one can't go on for an extended period of time without breathing in an extended race. And then the trade-off being on the other side. So when we are using that aerobic cycle, we're able to engage in better energy production longer term, but we can't produce as much ATP as quite
So it's not as much power.
True.
It's a lower power activity. Okay. Let's see. We got a couple of listeners. Kevin Bamford. Kevin's a triathlete. He's got a race coming up here in a couple months, or not even. I think it's like a month and a half. He's got a race coming up. How we doing, Kevin? Wave if you can hear me.
One thing interesting to add from my angle too, just as an aside, is this weekend I'll be doing a 65-mile bike race. So I am by no means an endurance athlete, so I very much train anaerobically.
Anaerobically. For anyone that doesn't know, John trained powerlifting and primarily strength training. Beyond just being a swimmer, he used strength training to better his swimming. It's something he continues to do pretty often, as often as he'd like to. Let's see here. Yep, Kevin can hear us.
But with that, I will say, even as you think of a swimmer, you think endurance athlete, but even then, I was not much anything over a 50-yard swimmer. So
what's the time duration on something like that?
About 20 to 25 seconds.
Okay. So for anyone that isn't quite sure, anaerobic typically is something that's 2 minutes or less, roughly, depending on the person, obviously, and the power output. If you're jogging really lightly for 2 minutes, that's not considered anaerobic. We're talking about high capacity, high power movement, like a weightlifting movement, pushing a sled, weighted carries, sprinting, hill sprints, really operating in your top 90 percentile there for your heart rate.
And even at something as extensive as 2 minutes, it's almost intermediate. So it's not as though it's a black and white issue. So there is anaerobic and there's aerobic, and there are these two nice words we like to compartmentalize things with. That, somewhere along the line, you are breathing and you are creating.
You're doing both at the same time, stress. Typically.
Yep.
Yeah. Especially during a sporting event, beyond just a marathon. If you're talking like football or rugby or soccer, you're operating, both systems are going on at the same time here.
And that's across the board, even with something like weightlifting, like we have here.
Yeah.
So even then, we are engaging those aerobic cycles, even on something as short as 10 seconds. It's just the ratio of which cycle we're using differs.
Yes, short hill runs, definitely anaerobic. Definitely, you can strengthen your legs too. It's my Uncle Charlie on the live feed here. Now, before we get into the anaerobic and the strength training for our runners and other endurance athletes, I just want to put a shameless plug in here. We have a meet coming up. It's a regional/national level meet for USA Weightlifting. It's down at the Valley Forge Casino and Resort this weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We have 3 lifters competing. We have Nikki Tuchitsky. She's lifting at 2:45 in the afternoon on Friday down there in the 58-kilo women's class. We have my dad, Gary. He's going to be lifting at 10:30 in the morning on Saturday in the 94 kilo as a master's. He's 56 years old this year in December. And then I myself, I'm going to be lifting for the first time in 3 years on a competitive stage. I'll be there at 6 o'clock in the evening on Saturday. So if you guys want to check out, we're really not sure what we do here. Part of what we do in this gym, in this facility, is sports performance training. And out of that, we have a weightlifting club. We perform the snatch and the clean and jerk. If you're not sure what those are, look them up. They're great exercises for anaerobic training, especially for sprinters, or if you're just a field athlete. If you do field sports, come on down, check it out, or go down to this meet this weekend and check it out. It's going to be a huge event. It's going to be about between 500 to 700 lifters. Some of the strongest people in the country are going to be down there. So definitely a great event. Come check it out. I have a bullet list of 4 things that you can kind of use to implement anaerobic training, and I'm coming from more of a running background. Now, I did do open ocean swims when I was in the Navy. I did a lot of endurance stuff. But just for perspective around here, running is a very big thing here. It's a very typical thing to go see for recreational runners. They go 5K runs, they do 1 mile fun runs, they do 10Ks, they do 5Ks, they do half marathons, marathons. It's kind of a thing in the Northeast here. That's one of the more popular things to do. Cycling is around, but I don't think it's quite as big of a sport.
Not quite as common.
And I've never spent like extensive time doing that. Now, getting back to the race that you have coming up, how long is it again?
It's 65 miles.
65 miles.
So it's Philly to Atlantic City.
It's not short. Luckily, it's relatively flat. I would think it's at sea level for the most part. Maybe a bridge here or there might give you some trouble.
Very unfamiliar
now,
with the race.
That being said, you haven't been training endurance really.
No.
You haven't really gotten a chance to get on the bike this entire week because it's been pouring rain here.
Today was my first day on it.
In your mind,
stationary.
Now obviously we're not looking to possibly win the event, but why in your mind do you feel confident that you will most definitely finish? There's no doubt in your mind to finish.
Just because I do come from a powerlifting background, but much like you, I've been kind of on, somewhat of a retirement for the past 3 years or so. Yeah. But that was my primary means of focus. That being said, I'm still in the weight room, but in addition to the powerlifting aspect, I'm still training very much like an all-around athlete would in a traditional strength and conditioning program. So that's super broad and encompassing in terms of what my training allows me to do. So if you were almost to think of it like a goalie in a goal box, by engaging in so many activities simultaneously, I'm better able to kind of reach in one direction or the other.
More well-rounded.
Yeah.
More
exactly.
athletic. Okay, and that's basically what we do here. Cross-training and strength and conditioning is we try to make a more well-rounded athlete. Are they going to win the marathon? No, but they could probably complete one. Whereas a specialist who's a specialist in their specific discipline, like just running marathons, probably would have a hard time competing in a weightlifting event or jumping over a box.
What we'd like to see, though, is multi-sport athletes, and so that strength and conditioning can be a means to an end in and of itself. However, we usually like to see people working in addition to strength and conditioning. It's supposed to supplement their skill-specific training.
Yeah. Okay. So first off, HIIT training or interval training, high-intensity interval training, great stuff. My coach, in particular, when I was developing as a runner on the cross-country team and the track team, he used fartlek runs. They were developed by the Swedish track team and the cross-country team for their distance runners. Basically what happens is you run at a steady state for an interval. You get elevated to more of a racing state, sometimes even up to a third level where you're almost sprinting, and then you climb back down for a minute to 2 minutes, sometimes up to 5 minutes, depending on that training cycle for the day. There's different protocols out there. You look them up, it's spelled Fartleks, fartleks. There's a lot of programs out there that utilize this procedure. It gives you a minute, 2 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes of recovery where you're still moving, and then you start back over again. Sometimes they fluctuate throughout the workout. Sometimes they're just, say 10 sets of that repeat, sometimes up to 20. It depends really on what kind of event you're training for. If you're looking at more like a marathon or ultra marathon, you're running 50 to 100 miles, you're looking at a little bit more volume. That being said, this would be considered anaerobic training. What you're doing is you're training your anaerobic threshold. And if you could talk a little bit about what that means.
So basically, the anaerobic threshold is, if we come back to the idea of energy system training, that anaerobic threshold is just the point at which you can maintain the greatest output for the longest period of time.
Okay.
Just kind of to expand upon on the idea of interval training, one that I really like and enjoy is the Tabata training, which is engaged in a few different varieties, but in the most traditional sense, Tabata was developed by it was developed in conjunction with I think it was the Japanese speed skating team, and the way it was initially implemented was 6 to 8 rounds of 20-second high-intensity exercise, followed by 10 seconds of the same exercise, but at a lighter intensity. And then the early research, which still stands, suggests that this type of training, which only lasts 4 to 6 minutes, yields the same caloric expenditure as something like a 2-hour run.
Okay.
So the density is present to really get more higher quality training in a significantly shorter period of time.
Yeah, with less volume.
True.
Less overall volume, which is great if you're talking about, from my perspective, as an aging runner. If you're continuing to do specifically running, cycling not so much, swimming not so much, you can kind of get away with a lot of volume if your body's okay with it, because it's not the constant pounding on the body. But if you're talking about doing 50 miles a week, that's a heck of a lot of volume. It's a lot of damage on the cartilage and the joints, especially if you don't have wonderful form, which a lot of people don't. I see it all the time when I'm driving up and down the road here.
People are quick to worry about what we do in here in terms of the damage that it presents to a young athlete. But just by running, when someone's even engaging it in a run,
there's a lot of force.
There is about 2 to 3 times more body weight coming down on each individual leg. So the force is present, and we're not just talking 1 or 2 bouts in this. We're talking about consistent for miles at a time.
For hours sometimes. If you're looking at an aging runner who's got arthritis, things like that, they're a little banged up, minimizing your volume and getting quality work out of your volume is a great way to kind of cut back a little bit, but still be able to train at a high level and still compete.
And that's where we could substitute with strength and conditioning as well. So that the volume of exercise can remain consistent, but it doesn't necessarily need to all be running. And then you're training other variables as well, which contribute to an overall better runner and a better athlete as a whole.
Stronger runner, and that's what we're looking for. Goal pace workouts. Now, this is a little bit more what we talked about in the middle, where you're a little bit more anaerobic, but also a lot of aerobic. It's more what they call base training. You're still getting a good amount of volume, and you're a little bit at a lower pace, but you're training yourself at a pace that you want to run your race at. Let's say I consistently come at 30 minutes for a 5K. It's roughly 10 minutes a mile. It's not breaking any records anytime soon, and I want to get down to a 25-minute eventually. Eventually, what you're going to have to do is run at those paces. You're going to have to do splits. You're going to have to do a mile split. You're going to have to do a 400 or an 800. And you're going to have to learn what it feels like to run at those capacities. Initially at shorter distances, like maybe just 400-meter repeats or 400-meter intervals where you're running a 2-minute around the track. You get used to how that feels. You recover for a lap. You do it again. You're on a constant, steady state of cardio, but you're elevating. You're getting a little bit more toward your anaerobic threshold. Not quite, you're not working at 90%, but you're at least getting outside your comfort zone. And I think a lot what people do is when they get out there and they're doing the runs, they're more looking at volume. And they look at their overall pace for the day. When they get done, they look at these apps, might say 9:02 or whatever. But okay, out of that training day, those 5, 6, 7 miles, where was your most quality at? It was probably within the first 3 to 4 miles for most novice runners.
And I think that's the same across the board.
Yeah, and it looks more like 7-minute miles. So that's great, but you weren't able to keep it up. And what ends up happening typically is as you go beyond that threshold, your form starts to break down. Your technique starts to break down, especially with running. It's really damaging when you have bad form. You start reinforcing bad habits. And same thing with swimming. You look at them, their legs are almost touching the bottom of the pool, and they just look like a drowning rat because they're just doing an extra lap for the sake of doing an extra lap.
And most notably in swimming, that's reinforced in slow flip turns.
Yeah.
So by doing less overall yardage, you could actually really enhance the quality of the events. I think one of my big qualms with my native sport of swimming is that coaches, almost in a braggadocious way, will talk about their high yardage programs, and there's no quality whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And the famous saying is, you don't swim longer to swim faster. You swim faster to swim faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I have the football team right now over Blue Mountain is doing Indian runs as part of their conditioning. If anyone doesn't know what that is, I'm sure there's other terms out there.
We'll stick with that one.
Yeah, right. We'll stick with the Indian term, Indian run. We used to do these. It was almost like a fun warm-up when we were kids in track and cross country. We got in a single file line, 2 by 2. There's 30, 40, 50 kids. You can make a pretty good, decent-sized group out of that. And whoever's in the back sprints or at least speeds up in order to surge past and get up into the front. They took over the lead. They set the pace. The person in the back, again, races up to the front. I think you continue this for a while, depending on the pace that the overall group is moving at. I've seen an overall improvement on their cardiovascular. They look like they recover in between their weightlifting sets better. They recover better during sprint workouts, during the conditioning at the end of the practice. And we're also doing hill sprints at least once to twice a week right now. They're not very long. We're not doing a ton of them. I'm talking about 5 to 6 total repetitions, really short, high intensity. I mean, we have them competing with each other. I pair them up with someone that's going to give them a go. And it's an all-out max effort sprint. They rest for about 2 minutes on the way down, stretch out, they're going again.
I think one thing we need to talk about, I mean, these hill sprints are great. All these, even the Tabatas are great. All this stuff is great, but it's only great if it's done on a base of good technique. And part of the problem with high volume is you could potentially manage to get through a run, even if you're doing heel strikes, if it's shorter distance, but you might be able to get a further distance if you're really focusing on that mid-foot strike, where that you can kind of dissipate a little bit more energy into that ankle before it gets.
Oh, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
Kind of working from that base of technique, even at a young age, and then working with some kind of super sport specific, even just gait specific coach throughout the adolescence as the feet change.
And you go through changes. We see that in weightlifting all the time. The grip width is going to change on the snatch because their arms get longer. Their stance and their squat's going to change because they got taller, feet grow. I mean, sometimes when they're 13, 14, it's really awkward to get them over the bar because they can't even get no appropriate starting position a lot of times, and you just kind of have to adjust from there. We have a family in the local area that has a couple prodigies growing up because their parents are both really good endurance athletes. The kids are, but one thing they didn't do, from talking to a couple other coaches that are in the know, what they didn't do was hammer them with volume right away. Even though they could, and they could probably handle it because they were very gifted kids. You're talking about a girl that's running sub 6 minutes, going into 5-minute miles in junior high. That's obscenely quick. That's obscenely gifted. Didn't hammer with 30, 40 miles. They gave her what was appropriate for her body, operating at that level. They did, interval training. They didn't really have her running around doing 10Ks and half marathons and marathons. They gave her what was appropriate for her developing body at that age.
And I'll say one thing: there might be in the research in terms of runners, particularly female runners who have gone through running throughout adolescence and their teenage years and so on. There is a pretty big potential for running economy to actually decrease, or the efficiency of the running strikes to decrease as women age, because the hip angle changes. It goes from being more up and down to more out to the side. So that angle will decrease, and that's a bony limitation that we can't really, unfortunately, do much about.
No.
Besides that endurance training itself and all these modalities.
Another thing I want to get into is actual sprint work. So we talked about the HIIT training doesn't necessarily have to involve your actual sport like swimming or running or cycling. You can use other modalities like bodyweight exercises, sleds, ideally low impact exercises, or exercises that are a little bit out of the norm of what your normal plan of movement is great.
Early and mid out of season, I think that's the best thing they can do.
You don't have to be so specific. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people in their sports, specifically endurance and any kind of sport that involves a lot of running, the sport coaches or the coaches, these so-called specialists that people take their kids to, have them doing specific things for that sport right away, almost a year out, when really they should be doing general physical training and then specifying as you get closer to season. Like soccer and basketball players, what do they have them do? Jump up and down and run.
Yeah.
Jump up and down and run.
Jumps.
Lots of jumps. It's obscene amount. And we're going to get that in another episode. We're going to talk about plyometric training, which I think is another great thing for anaerobic training in a limited basis. I'm talking maybe once to twice a week at most. You have to limit your number of reps and sets on that. You have to think about your efficacy, like what's the likelihood of getting hurt. They don't need to be doing it 3 to 4 times a week doing box jumps. Once a week is fine, especially when you're talking about someone who's so specialized in endurance. They're going to be so sensitive to the volume of work from something like that I think doing it once a week is plenty amount.
One thing, just to kind of elaborate a little bit. So outside of any kind of sports season, the cardiovascular capacities decrease much more rapidly than any kind of strength or other physical attributes do.
Yeah.
So to physically train an endurance athlete in any kind of cardiovascular fashion outside of the traditional exercise they're doing really mitigates that wear and tear.
Yeah, big time. And one thing I do find too, just for myself, if I say I take a break from weightlifting and strength training and I want to get back into something like running or swimming, I don't find that it takes very long to get back in shape. I find like as quickly as you lose that gas, so to speak,
sure.
As quickly as you can get it back within 4 to 8 weeks, you're back to capacity. As long as you're taking care of yourself, obviously, you're not smoking cigarettes or doing anything like that. Whereas strength training takes a longer time to
lose,
and it takes a longer time to gain. So taking a break from your respective sport, your discipline of running or swimming long distances for a few weeks to a month or two, people would freak out if you tell them, well, I don't want you in the pool for like a whole month. I want you to take a break from the pool.
Which I advocate for.
Yeah, give them a break. Not only is it physically good, it's psychologically good for them. And we talked about during this early specialization episode we had, it's good psychological too, but it gives them a break from doing other things, gives them a chance to do other things besides something so specific to their sport. Sprint work. Like I said, that's not quite maximum effort. In the interval training, actual sprint repeats, even for a marathon runner, are great. Now, you're going to tailor this. These workouts are going to change depending on what kind of race you're training for, where you're at in your athletic career. Are you a novice runner that's running a 9-minute mile? You're only running 5Ks right now? You don't have to do a ton of these. If you do 4 400s or 4 to 6 200-meter sprints with regulated rest in between, and they're your actual true max effort with good form, you're going to get a lot out of it. You're going to raise your anaerobic threshold. And along with that, from what I understand and from my experiences, you're raising your aerobic threshold too. No longer is the lactate here, it's here. And now all of a sudden that, let's say it was an 8-minute mile pace that was out of reach, my legs spurned up, I couldn't keep it up. All of a sudden that's not so bad. And it becomes your aerobic capacity. And you keep chipping away like that. That ceiling keeps raising, and you're able to eventually, potentially go down to a 7 or 6-minute mile. Training that way. A typical workout, 4 400s, 8 400s. It really just depends on the person.
One thing, just to interject there. I mean, people they'll again just add on volume.
Yeah.
But even if you're doing 4 400s.
It's a whole mile at a high intensity.
And you're a 400er. You do that's where you compete. You've already done 4 times your competition load. Yeah. So just make it as effective as possible. Yeah. Minimize the stress on that aerobic system and train with quality.
Another thing we did, training 5Ks, and my personal experience, it still works great for me. The last time I did a 5K, mile repeats. Training. It's obviously not a sprint, but it's the max capacity for your mile. Like, what's your best mile? Take that down. Let's say it's a 5-minute mile. Run a 5:30. Run a 6-minute mile. Take a 5-minute break. Recover. Do it again. Do 3 of those. Do 4 of those at most. Do that as your base training preparing for your 5K rather than, okay, I have a 3-mile race to run. That's my, that's my event. I'm going to run 12 miles. At a certain point, and yes, you do need base aerobic capacity, and you need a base of fitness, base volume. At a certain point, it's almost like with hypertrophy training. The difference between 20 reps and 50 reps on the back squat, diminished returns. It becomes a thing where, like, okay, really, how much more are you getting out of it because you did that extra 2 miles or extra 5 miles?
And when we're talking endurance sports, we're talking endurance coaches. So they'll tend to favor these longer durations for a greater portion of the year, and then just completely neglect some of these shorter distances that they should otherwise be developing.
I will say that was one of the places I was lucky. Is that the coach that I had, he just stopped coaching recently. He was very good about that because he came from a running program. I want to say it was Bucknell. I could be wrong. They had a really good program. It was peaks and valleys, undulating volume and intensity throughout the week into the season. We did a lot of base running during the summer, 9 to 10 miles. Those started to diminish by the mid to end of September. We were done doing 10, 12-mile runs. We were doing really short, high-intensity stuff. We were doing whistle drills. It wasn't uncommon for the longest run to be 6 miles for a cross-country team that was running a 3-mile race.
And with that, you'll also see less injuries. You'll see better performances. And you'll see better performances not only at the end of the year after a long taper, but you'll see better performances throughout the year as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I always felt like I peaked at the right time. The guy scheduled it really well to where we made it to districts. I ran my best races toward the end of the season instead of a lot of teams around here, from what I remember, and I still see it occasionally. You'll see that the kid does really good in the beginning of the season because he's in really good shape, and then they peter off, they get injured. You see a lot of injuries, kids all taped up and iced up, and they're in tears just about at the end of a race. Their bodies break down because they can't handle the constant beating.
With that high volume, it's really easy to miss that ideal, that sweet spot of training where you're tapering off perfectly at the end of the season. If you were to miss the mark by 2 weeks on either side, if you 2 weeks early, you got burnout 2 weeks after the fact, and you're not as prepared as you could have been.
And it's the same thing with the sprinter. Even with weightlifting right now, I'm tapering off myself. I tapered off my dad, Nikki. We're doing minimal work to practice our sport. It's pretty much down to the dress rehearsal, basically. The intensities are down, the loads are down. We're not lifting anywhere near as heavy as we're going to this weekend. We're just staying moving, staying mobile, and it's all about recovery right now because of the hormonal response too.
I think that's a tough thing for people to grasp is to
taper.
It's so close to a big event doing so little.
Well, it comes in, and I explained this to somebody the other day. They were like, "Oh, we noticed, you're not going as heavy. You're not deadlifting this week." And I said, "No, I'm not going to get any stronger for my event in the next 7 days. It's by a gram." I'm gonna be able to lift
particularly with that deadlift. That's too CNS dominant anyway.
Could you imagine deadlifting the week of, like, say tonight? The Tuesday night is typically my back night. Heavy single deadlift, and then trying to max on the snatch and clean and jerk at a big event the following Saturday. No, you need to taper off. Your body needs a break for it to operate at its optimal levels. Now, obviously, if you're talking about a competitive season, you're looking at a smaller scale. You're looking week to week, within the week, tapering the day just before, but you're also tapering for specific events. Like, okay, what invitationals and what part of your season is the most important? It's the tail end. It's when you're going to districts, going to states, regionals, depending on your sport. That's when you taper off. You don't necessarily taper off for the first meet of the season, especially if it's just a season opener with someone that's not like a high-level competitor. But you have it in mind. You have two different stages. You're tapering throughout the months on certain things, and you're also tapering, the day or two before a major meet.
And with something like, it changes a little bit with something like swimming, where the season is it's drug out for so long.
It's long. Winter sports are long.
Yeah, like November to April or something like that, depending on how far you get in the competitive season.
Next thing I want to talk about, and final thing, is strength training. We lifted, now we didn't lift super heavy. We probably could have done a little bit more of this, but we did lift weights. We got on the bleachers with dumbbells. We did a lot of lunges, squats, push-ups, a lot of abdominal work, a lot of core training, real core training, not just sit-ups. that I think a lot of people who don't have an endurance background that kind of get into it late in life is like kind of a thing to do to keep themselves active. They miss out on that development. Squats, front squats, deadlifts, I think are great. Sled pushes, weighted carries, anything that's going to strengthen your body, especially your lower extremities and your core and your hips, I think is great.
And not only from a performance standpoint, but also from an injury prevention standpoint, which is frequently where I come at this run. Going back to the example of running, I mean, when you're running, you're really not engaging in full hip extension or full hip flexion. So that's kind of where we'd see something like a squat come into play.
Yeah.
And then the additional benefit of that is just with that greater muscle mass, you also have greater force dissipation. Okay, so if you're getting that good mid-foot strike, you get a little bit more force dissipation through that mobile joint of the ankle, less through the knee, and also more through the hips, which kind of allows the body to respond better for, again, an extended period of time. Yeah,
better gait for sure. I see it all the time. People, I can kind of spot them out right away. If they have a hard time, first-time client, I'm showing them how to just do a body weight. We're talking a body weight air squat. They have a really rough time, not just range of motion-wise, but strength-wise. Within 5 to 10 repetitions of just doing a bodyweight squat, they look like they're going to faint because they just don't have that strength in their legs. Yeah. And I know that they've mentioned that they do like to run. I know that their running is so slow. The gait's so small. They're basically just pounding the hell out of their knees. They're getting shin splints right off the gate. Yeah. Super underpowered to where, like, even if I want them to run at a maximum effort, it's so slow. They're really, I mean, I guess they'll get something out of it because they're so undertrained. But someone like that would really major benefit from doing some power training versus just volume, because they're so undertrained in one spectrum that any strength training, even if it's just once a week, is going to pay dividends for someone like that, big time. Let's see what else we got here.
Even if you were to look at something like, so even for an endurance runner, we can look at myofibril hypertrophy, which is just a more long so there's two types of hypertrophy or muscle growth, and one of which is the myofibril hypertrophy, which is actually an enlarging of the size of the cross section of a muscle. So by engaging in that, we have a greater muscle base through which we can again
produce more force.
So and that's something that's vastly underdeveloped in the majority of endurance athletes, because they're never training in that 1 to 5 rep range that really induces that stimuli.
Now, given some of these exercises, what would you recommend, like a training protocol look like? Like, say I'm not training for a marathon. Let's say I'm training for a 10K. Doing my first 10K, and I want to incorporate some strength training. What are some things that you would want to see?
Because with running over that distance, we're not really engaging in a super. The hips don't have a chance to fully separate from one another. So you want to see some unilateral or one-legged training. So some examples of that, not necessarily one leg, but one leg dominant, something like a bodyweight split squat, where those legs could physically separate a little bit more. Those hips become
they're not relying on each other.
True.
Okay.
Something like that's always good. Even bilateral exercises, traditional compound exercises like you're talking, like a squat, or any of the variations thereof are fantastic.
Okay.
And then even things that what I say, and kind of one of the themes at Ruthless Performance is the idea of anti-specific training. So just because someone is running on a frequent basis and something might not seem to have any implications whatsoever on the sport, it has implications for their posture and their overall well-being, which again expands that base of athleticism through which they can train their specific doctrine.
Which you would say, doing some bat wing rows or some ring work, or even, if they're able to do pull-ups, for the sake of having them do pull-ups, and pull their upper back together a little bit, make them a little bit more conscious of their posture would be a bad idea.
There's two things that I focus on across the board with any kind of athlete. Strong glutes, strong butt, and strong traps. If the butt, so the hips, and the traps, which controls the shoulder girdle, can function at a high level, the rest of the athlete will function at a relatively high level, just based on
Makes sense. That's pretty much all I have for tonight. If anybody has any questions for me or John, where can they get a hold of you, John?
Ruthless Perform on Instagram and Twitter, or info@ruthlessperformance.com.
And then you guys can reach me here at the gym. I'm at 1506 Center Turnpike down here in Deer Lake. Right off of 61. We're on the southbound side. We have a light right there. We're in the old Fessler building. It's now the auction bid board building now. Or you can send me an email at fluidfitnesssolutions@gmail.com, or you can direct message me on my Instagram, Fluid Fitness Solutions, or our Facebook. And you can also catch this episode or any of our episodes on our YouTube channel, Fluid Fitness. All the episodes are saved along with our fitness tip of the week. Will also be on there as well. You guys have a good night. I hope you enjoyed this. Anything else, John?
Nope.
Have a good night, guys.